April 16, 1945. Above the embattled fleet at Okinawa, Flight Petty Officer First Class Setsuo Ishino banked his Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber, its engine screaming. Below him, at Radar Picket Station No. 1, lay his target, a lone American destroyer, designated DD-724. For Ishino, and the dozens of other pilots of the Kikusui No. 3 mass kamikaze attack, the mathematics of victory were simple and absolute. One pilot, one plane, one bomb, traded for one enemy warship and its hundreds of sailors. The destroyer, a fragile tin canned by naval standards, was a guaranteed kill, a sacrifice deemed worthy for the Emperor. He began his final terrifying dive, his bomb already released, his aircraft now a guided missile of steel and flesh aimed directly at the ship's superstructure. The impact was devastating, a thunderous cataclysm of shearing metal and vaporized fuel. But as the smoke cleared, something impossible was happening. The ship was still there. It was burning, its guns were mangled, but it was still fighting. Aboard the USS Laffey, gunner's mate Third Class Elias Sepulveda, his face blackened by smoke, watched in disbelief as another Zero screamed in from the port side. They just kept coming. What none of the Japanese pilots could comprehend was that this moment, this single 80-minute engagement, would trigger the most profound psychological shock in the history of the kamikaze program. A systematic demolition of their belief in spiritual superiority through the sheer, bloody-minded resilience of one American ship. The strategic reality for Japan in the spring of 1945 was one of desperation. The American war machine, an industrial colossus, had pushed relentlessly across the Pacific. The Imperial Japanese Navy was a shattered remnant of its former glory, its carriers at the bottom of the sea, its battleships crippled. Lacking the planes, pilots and fuel to fight a conventional war, Vice Admiral Mato Mogaki and other commanders turned to a weapon born of fanaticism, the kamikaze, or divine wind. The logic was brutal and sacrificial. Inexperienced pilots, flying outdated aircraft laden with explosives, would deliberately crash into American warships. It was a strategy designed to inflict maximum psychological terror and unsustainable losses upon the U.S. Navy. The most vulnerable targets were the destroyers on the outer picket lines, the lonely sentinels tasked with providing early radar warning of incoming air raids. These ships, isolated and exposed, were considered expendable, both by the Americans who sent them there and the Japanese who targeted them. On the morning of April 16, the USS Laffey, an Allen M. Sumner-class destroyer, was one such sentinel. Commissioned just over a year earlier, she was a state-of-the-art warship, bristling with 5-inch main guns and dozens of 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft cannons. Her crew of over 300 men, a mix of seasoned veterans and young recruits, knew the danger. They had already survived D-Day and the invasion of the Philippines. But nothing could have prepared them for the ordeal that was about to unfold. At 8:30 a.m., the Laffey's radar screens lit up. A massive wave of enemy aircraft, over 50 strong, was inbound. Lieutenant Commander Frederick Beckton, the Laffey's skipper, sounded general quarters. All hands to battle stations. The ship's guns began to track the incoming swarm. The first phase of the attack was conventional, with Japanese bombers dropping their payloads and strafing the destroyer. The Laffey's gunners fought back with a disciplined fury, their tracers lacing the sky, downing several attackers. But this was merely the prelude. Then came the kamikazes. They descended like a swarm of angry hornets, not in ones or twos, but in a relentless, coordinated wave from every point of the compass. The first suicide plane, a Val dive bomber, screamed in from the port stern. The Laffey's gunners poured a torrent of shells into it, but it kept coming, its pilot determined to die for the Emperor. It glanced off the ship's 20mm gun mount and crashed into the sea, its bomb exploding perilously close, showering the deck with shrapnel. A moment of relief was shattered by another shout, "Kamikaze on the starboard beam!" The mathematics of survival were being rewritten, not by strategic plans, but by the sheer, indomitable will of a crew that refused to die. Every assumption the Japanese held about American morale, about the fragility of their ships, and about the unstoppable power of the divine wind, was about to be shattered against the battered, burning, but unbroken hull of the USS Laffey. The legend of the ship that would not die was being forged in fire and steel. The brief respite after the first kamikaze crashed into the sea was just that, brief. The sky above Radar Picket Station No. 1 was a hornet's nest of Japanese aircraft, a swirling vortex of VALs, Zeros, and Judy dive bombers, all converging on the lone destroyer. On the bridge of the USS Laffey, Lieutenant Commander Frederick Beckton watched in grim disbelief as the next wave peeled off, their engines screaming in a death dive. The systematic demolition of his ship was about to begin, and with it, a test of human endurance that would defy all logic. The second attacker, a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber, came in low and fast from the port side. The Laffey's gunners, already exhausted from the initial engagement, swung their cannons around, the barrels of the 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikons glowing red. Tracers stitched patterns across the sky, finding their mark. The Judy began to trail smoke, its engine sputtering, yet its pilot, driven by a fanatic's resolve, held his course. He wasn't aiming to drop a bomb, the plane was the bomb. The Judy slammed into the aft 5-inch gun mount, Mount 53. The impact was cataclysmic, a thunderous explosion of fuel and ordnance that ripped through the stern. The gun mount, with its entire crew, was instantly obliterated. A massive fire erupted, fed by aviation fuel and the ship's own ammunition. Shrapnel, white-hot and jagged, scythed across the fantail. For the Japanese pilots circling overhead, this should have been the killing blow. No destroyer, a fragile tin-canned by design, could sustain such a direct, devastating hit and remain in the fight. They had seen ships crippled by far less. Their doctrine, their very belief system, told them the Laffey was finished. But the ship did not die. Damage control parties, led by Lieutenant Frank Manson, plunged into the inferno. With hoses spewing water and foam, they battled the raging gasoline fire, their faces scorched, their lungs choked with acrid smoke. They knew that if the fire reached the aft ammunition magazine, the entire stern of the ship would vaporize, taking them and hundreds of their shipmates with it. Their fight was not just against the flames, but against the clock. As they fought the fire, the attacks intensified. The Japanese pilots, seeing their target still afloat and fighting, pressed their assault with renewed fury. A third kamikaze, another Val, screamed in from the starboard quarter. The remaining guns, their crews dodging debris and battling the ship's violent lurches, opened fire. The plane was hit repeatedly, shedding pieces of its fuselage, but it kept coming. It crashed into the aft deckhouse, just forward of the burning gun mount, its bomb detonating with a concussive blast that buckled the deck plates and sent another shower of shrapnel across the ship. The cumulative effect of these hits was devastating. The Laffey's stern was a mangled, burning wreck. Her rudder was jammed, leaving the ship circling helplessly. Multiple gun mounts were knocked out of action, their crews killed or wounded. Communications were severed. Yet, through the smoke and chaos, the ship's forward guns continued to fire. Gunner's mate 3rd Class Carl M. Rutt, manning a 40mm mount, saw his gun captain killed by shrapnel. Without hesitation, Rutt took command, shouting orders and directing fire at the next wave of attackers. This was not the act of a demoralized, defeated crew. This was the defiance of men who refused to surrender their ship. The Japanese pilots must have watched in disbelief. Their attacks, each one designed to be a fatal blow, were being absorbed by a ship that simply would not die. The mathematics of their suicide doctrine were failing. They had been told that American sailors, soft and decadent, would break under the psychological terror of the divine wind. But the men of the Laffey, surrounded by death and destruction, were demonstrating a resilience that was incomprehensible. The psychological collapse was not happening on the American destroyer, but in the cockpits of the Japanese planes, as they witnessed an enemy that defied the very logic of their sacrifice. The onslaught continued, relentless and without mercy. For the crew of the USS Laffey, the world had shrunk to a maelstrom of fire, smoke, and screaming engines. The Japanese pilots, seeing their target crippled and circling, descended for the kill, a frenzy of Vals and Zeros determined to finish the job. On the ship's bridge, a signalman turned to Lieutenant Commander Beckton and uttered the words that would become legendary. "We're still making 18 knots, Captain, and the flag is still there." It was a declaration of defiance in the face of obliteration. The fourth kamikaze, a Val, came in low from the port bow, aiming directly for the bridge. The forward gunners, their barrels hot, poured a stream of 20mm and 40mm shells into the attacker. The plane disintegrated under the hail of fire, but its momentum carried its bomb forward. The bomb struck the foremast, showering the bridge with shrapnel and narrowly missing Becton himself. The psychological pressure was immense. The enemy was not just attacking the ship, but its very nerve center. Then came the fifth and sixth impacts, a devastating 1-2 punch that nearly tore the heart out of the Laffey. Two planes, attacking in quick succession, slammed into the ship's port side. One, a Judy, struck near the forward smokestack, its bomb detonating in the engine room, killing several men and rupturing steam lines. The second crashed into the same area, its fuel and wreckage adding to the chaos. The ship shuddered violently, its speed dropping, its power flickering. The very air below decks became a scalding, high-pressure hell. The damage was now catastrophic. The rudder was jammed hard to port, forcing the ship into a tight, uncontrollable circle. Multiple gun mounts were destroyed, their crews annihilated. Fires raged in several locations, and the aft section of the ship was a mangled, burning wreck. To any outside observer, the USS Laffey was a dead ship, a funeral pyre awaiting its final descent into the abyss. The mathematics of survival had become an absurdity. Yet, the fight continued. On the deck, damage control teams, their numbers dwindling, moved with a desperate, practiced courage. They fought fires, jettisoned live ammunition that was cooking off in the heat, and tended to the wounded amidst the carnage. Men whose gun mounts were destroyed grabbed fire hoses or ammunition clips for other guns. Below decks, in the suffocating heat and steam of the damaged engine rooms, engineers worked frantically to keep the ship's heart beating, bypassing ruptured lines and fighting to maintain power. Their efforts were a testament to the iron will that had been forged in a year of hard service. The Japanese pilots, witnessing this impossible resilience, must have been confounded. They had hit the destroyer with everything they had, multiple direct kamikaze impacts, bombs, and strafing fire. They had crippled its steering, knocked out its guns, and set it ablaze. By every measure of naval warfare, the ship should have been sunk. Yet, it remained afloat, its forward guns still spitting defiance into the sky. The most profound psychological blow to the Japanese doctrine was being delivered not by American industrial might, but by the sheer, bloody-minded refusal of a few hundred men to die. They were demonstrating a truth that was not in any of the kamikaze pilots' manuals, that a ship is more than steel and machinery. It is a living entity, animated by the collective will of its crew. The Laffey was absorbing a level of punishment that should have been impossible, shattering the enemy's belief in the guaranteed effectiveness of their most terrifying weapon. The divine wind was crashing against an immovable object of American grit. The onslaught had reached its crescendo. The USS Laffey, burning, crippled and circling, had absorbed a level of punishment that defied all naval engineering and combat doctrine. 6 kamikaze aircraft had slammed into her hull, for bombs had torn through her superstructure, and her decks were a landscape of twisted metal and a testament to the brutal cost of survival. For the Japanese pilots still in the sky, the destroyer was a wounded beast, ready for the final, merciful kill. But the beast still had teeth. The remaining gun crews, many of them wounded, their faces blackened by smoke, continued to fight with a primal fury. They fired at anything that moved, their gun tubs slick with blood and hydraulic fluid. Ammunition passers, seeing their gunners fall, would step over their fallen comrades to take their place, seamlessly continuing the deadly rhythm of load, aim, fire. This was no longer about tactics or training, it was about a collective, unbreakable will to resist. A 7th kamikaze, a Zero, screamed in low from the port side, aiming for the ship's shattered midsection. The few remaining 20mm guns opened up, their tracers reaching out to claw at the attacker. The plane was hit, and hit again, but its pilot, already on his final approach, was unstoppable. The Zero slammed into the mainmast, its wings slicing through the rigging before the fuselage cartwheeled into the sea. The ship shuddered from the impact, more shrapnel raking the deck, but the blow was not fatal. She had survived again. Then came the eighth and final direct hit of the day. Another Japanese plane, diving steeply, crashed onto the aft 5-inch gun mount, Mount 53, the very one that had been obliterated in the opening moments of the attack. The impact was a devastating coup de grace on an already destroyed section of the ship, adding more fire and chaos to the inferno on the stern. By now, the Laffey was in a desperate state. Her rudder was jammed, she was down by the stern, and fires raged in multiple locations. Her ammunition was perilously low. The crew had done everything humanly possible, fighting for an astonishing 80 minutes against a continuous, overwhelming onslaught. They had faced an estimated 22 separate Japanese aircraft and had shot down 9 of them, an incredible feat for a single, embattled destroyer. But their endurance was reaching its breaking point. It was in this final, desperate moment that the tide turned. The Laffey's repeated calls for assistance, and the sheer spectacle of her impossible survival, had not gone unnoticed. American aircraft, Marine Corps F-4U Corsairs and Navy F-6F Hellcats, finally arrived on the scene. They tore into the remaining Japanese planes with a vengeance, breaking up the attack and shooting down the circling predators. The arrival of friendly air cover was like a cavalry charge, a moment of profound relief for the exhausted crew of the Laffey. Simultaneously, other ships from the picket line, having fought off their own attackers, began to close in. The sight of other destroyers and support vessels approaching meant that the Laffey was no longer alone. The immediate threat had passed. As the last Japanese plane was shot down, an eerie silence descended over the ship, broken only by the crackle of flames and the groans of the wounded. The 80-minute hell was over. The USS Laffey was a floating wreck, a testament to the brutal effectiveness of the kamikaze. But she was still afloat. Her flag, tattered and scorched, was still flying. She had not sunk. The psychological impact of this survival was immense. For the Japanese, the failure to sink a single, isolated destroyer after committing such a massive force was a devastating blow to the kamikaze doctrine. It proved that even their most terrifying weapon was not infallible, that it could be met and defeated by sheer American resilience and firepower. For the Americans, the story of the Laffey became an instant legend, a symbol of the Navy's indomitable spirit. The ship that would not die had earned her name, not through advanced technology or overwhelming numbers, but through the raw, unbreakable courage of her crew, who had looked into the face of a suicidal onslaught and refused to yield. As the smoke cleared and the last of the Japanese attackers were driven from the sky, the crew of the USS Laffey took stock of the almost unbelievable devastation. Their ship, once a pristine instrument of war, was now a floating testament to the brutal realities of combat at Radar Picket Station No. 1. The decks were a mangled junkyard of sheared metal, shattered gun mounts, and the burned-out husks of Japanese aircraft. Fires still smoldered in multiple locations, and the acrid smell of cordite and burned fuel hung heavy in the air. The human cost of the 80-minute ordeal was staggering. 32 sailors were killed in action, and another 71 were wounded, many severely. The crew, exhausted and shell-shocked, immediately turned to the grim tasks of tending to their fallen and wounded shipmates, fighting the remaining fires, and assessing the catastrophic damage. The ship's rudder was jammed, her stern was heavily damaged and low in the water, and her communication and fire control systems were a wreck. By every conventional measure, she was a constructive total loss. Yet, she was not lost. Under her own limited power, and with the assistance of tugs, the crippled destroyer was painstakingly towed away from the picket line, a journey of survival that was in itself a minor miracle. When she finally reached the safety of a forward anchorage, seasoned naval officers and repair crews were stunned by what they saw. It seemed impossible that a ship could absorb 6 direct kamikaze hits, for bomb impacts and numerous near misses, and still remain afloat. The sheer scale of the damage was a testament to the ferocity of the attack, but her survival was an even greater testament to the ruggedness of her construction and, above all, the indomitable will of her crew. The story of the Laffey's impossible survival spread like wildfire throughout the Pacific Fleet. It became an instant legend, a symbol of American resolve in the face of Japan's most terrifying weapon. The crew's actions were recognized with the highest honors. The ship herself was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, the highest honor that can be bestowed upon a naval vessel, for her heroism in action. Her skipper, Lieutenant Commander Frederick Beckton, was awarded the Navy Cross. Numerous other crew members received the Navy Cross, Silver Stars, and Bronze Stars for their individual acts of extraordinary bravery. The Laffey was eventually patched up enough to make the long, slow journey back to the United States. Arriving in Seattle, she was a spectacle, her battle scars a vivid illustration of the horrors of the Kamikaze War. The decision was made to repair her, a monumental task that underscored her symbolic importance. She was eventually returned to service, a living monument to the battle she had endured. The legacy of the USS Laffey on April 16, 1945, is profound and multifaceted. A symbol of resilience, she became the ultimate symbol of the U.S. Navy's fighting spirit, earning her the immortal nickname, the ship that would not die. Her story proved that even in the face of a suicidal, fanatical enemy, courage, discipline, and superior damage control could prevail. A psychological blow to Japan. For the Japanese, the Laffey's survival was a demoralizing failure. It demonstrated that their kamikaze strategy, while terrifying, was not a guaranteed war winner. It showed that American ships and, more importantly, American sailors, could withstand the psychological and physical shock of these attacks and keep fighting. A testament to naval engineering, her survival was also a testament to the rugged construction of the Allen M. Sumner-class destroyers, proving that these tin cans were far tougher than their nickname implied. An enduring memorial. After a long and distinguished post-war career, the USS Laffey was eventually decommissioned and became a museum ship. Today, she rests at Patriots Point in South Carolina, the last surviving Sumner-class destroyer in North America, her decks still bearing the faint scars of her ordeal. She stands as a silent, powerful tribute to the courage of her crew and all the sailors who served on the lonely, dangerous picket lines off Okinawa. The story of the USS Laffey is a microcosm of the brutal Pacific War, a tale of technological fury met with human courage. It proves that sometimes, the greatest victories are measured not in territory gained or enemies vanquished, but in the simple, defiant act of survival against impossible odds. The ship that refused to sink became an enduring legend, a steel testament to the unbreakable will of those who sailed her through 80 minutes of hell and brought her home.